Thank you for keeping it tuned in to Outreach Radio Chicago. Follow us on Twitter at mmercado2333. Like the page on Facebook at Outreach Radio Chicago. And subscribe to us on YouTube at Mike Mercado2333. And joining us today on Outreach Radio Chicago, he's the director and CEO of BioCorRX. And you can find out more information at beataddiction.com or call 888-993-1099. He is Brady Granier, and he joins us today on Outreach Radio Chicago. Brady, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
So can you give us a little information about what exactly is an addiction?
Well, I mean, I'm not a doctor, so I am a former registered nurse, so I have my credentials there. But an addiction means something different for many people. But it's a physical, and it could be a physical and or a mental need and for a certain substance, thing, or an activity. So it's a dependency on something, and some people are addicted to drugs and alcohol, some to gambling, to sex, to various things, and it affects people differently. It's not kind of a one blanket, It doesn't get. It's not the same for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Very complex disease of the brain, and it is different for many people, and there's some genetic aspects to it, and some people have that tendency to you pop a pill and they become an addict, on one dose on a month supply or a week supply of pain medication after an injury, and in some people it doesn't do the same thing. So how do you explain that?
Mm-hmm.
That some people have that addictive personality, they say. So it's kind of the basic definition is it's a condition of being addicted to a particular substance, thing, or an activity. But it could be different for each individual.
Well, and I one of the main reasons I bring this up is I think sometimes people have a hard time with knowing when to ask for help, or even if they don't know how to ask for help. And as I was doing the research for the show, I went on beataddiction.com, and there's so many stories you could read. You could see the testimony from the actor from, I believe it was Growing Pains. I'm a 90s baby, so it's a little bit before my time, but kind of the idea, though, that it's actually something that picks up and people believe in. So can you tell us a little bit about the program that you're a part of, that you're the CEO and director of, the head honcho of?
Yeah, the head honcho, yeah. The program that we have it consists of two components. It's the BioCorRX recovery program. The first component of it is a medication that's in an implantable form that's surgically implanted in the lower abdomen underneath the fat tissue above the muscle. It's a minor procedure. It takes 20-30 minutes. Local anesthesia. You could do it on a weekend. It could be done missing a half day of work. Outpatient procedure. And I can get more into what that is, because that tends to be the shiny toy that everybody gravitates towards. The other part of our program is the actual counseling part, which is, in my opinion, and the expert's opinion, is the most important part of the program, because that's actually what helps people build tools that they need to change their behavioral patterns and recognize and avoid triggers that happen in life.
So let's go to the shiny new toy.
The shiny new toy is the implant.
Yeah.
It's not as new as – it's new to the layman, but implants of this drug called naltrexone, I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, have been in use for close to 20 years worldwide, very effectively. Naltrexone is the miracle drug, in my opinion, that's part of this that's in this implant. Naltrexone itself was in a pill form, or still is in a pill form, and an injectable form. It was FDA approved back in 1985 for opioid abuse, heroin, etc. In 1994, it was FDA approved for alcohol abuse. So as you can tell, it was FDA approved before your time.
Yeah.
It's been around for quite some time. It's actually been studied since the 60s, actually. But the problem, the drug itself is very, very effective. It actually has other uses, off-the-shelf uses for autoimmune diseases and other things, which is very fascinating. And we don't treat that. We don't own that. We don't any of that. But it's a fascinating drug that people should look up.
Yeah.
But the problem was that it was in the pill form, and the problem you have with patient or addicts, or any patient for that matter, is compliance with taking medications. across the board, there's non-compliance with taking medications, especially in the addiction community. It's even more difficult because that addict needs to wake up every day and decide, am I going to take this naltrexone pill, or am I going to have a rendezvous with my best friend, or that drug, or whatever. So it's a decision they need to make on a daily basis, and that proves very difficult for someone to do when they're in the grips of their addiction. So there's a compliance issue with it, and that's why it never really took off back when it was FDA approved because of that issue, and there was no big money in it from big pharma from their perspective. So if big pharma doesn't get behind something, then the medical community won't really learn about it, as well as the patient, the general population.
Right.
I come from the healthcare background. It was FDA approved when I was in the healthcare field, and I'd never heard of the drug because we weren't educated on it in school or by big pharma.
Wow.
So there's a few reasons why it never really took off back in the day. Now, cut to years later, there are different forms of the drug, and an injectable form called Vivitrol, which is used that lasts about 3 to 4 weeks. So it's a better alternative than the oral, but still doesn't give that longevity of an implant. And the implants, there are a few in the market, and they range in longevity from 2 months to 6 months, and maybe even up to a year in some cases, depending on the person's metabolism. So there are other forms of the implant out there, but generally speaking, they all last several months, which is the important thing, because if someone stops using for several months, the brain can start rewiring itself, and that's very important. So the longer someone stays sober, the better their chances are of long-term sobriety. So that's the shiny toy, is this implant that will last several months, and all it does is give you a window of opportunity. It's not a cure. It's not a panacea.
Right.
It's a tool, another tool in the tool chest to give someone that clarity time of several months, where then the counseling program or someone else's counseling program or our counseling program can actually speak to the individual during that time when they have the medication in their body, and not to the addict who's under the cloud of addiction and just thinking and craving the next drink or the next use all day, like typically happens. You've ever heard of 90 meetings in 90 days? Well, there's a science behind that, because if you can go to 90 meetings in 90 days and not use, then the brain starts to rewire itself.
Wow, okay.
That's very good, but 90 meetings in 90 days is pretty difficult for most people.
Yeah.
So a lot of people just can't do it. They can, more power to them. I mean, that's the route to go. But if a lot of people that just can't get over those gripping cravings, then the use of medication like naltrexone in any form can be very beneficial to that individual to get through that first 90 days and even longer. So that's the shiny tool in the toolkit, and it's all part of this movement called medication-assisted treatment. It's relatively, it's been around for a while, but it's starting to be more mainstream, and that's the use of medications to treat addiction. Because for many, many decades, it was frowned upon to treat addiction with a drug or with a medicine. You're treating an addiction to a medication or alcohol with another medication, and that paradigm is shifting in the industry and in academia, and you're starting to see more widespread use of that term medication-assisted treatment, which includes drugs like methadone and Suboxone, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard of, but those are used to treat. Those two are used to treat heroin addiction, not alcoholism. Naltrexone is different than those two drugs because they're non-addictive. Naltrexone is a non-addictive drug, and it's used to treat alcoholism and opioid or heroin addiction. But important, it's non-addictive. So it's a different drug in itself.
It amazes me. It just does, because what I'm hearing here is just the advancements. The first thing that I've noticed is the advancement of researchers and people willing to, change the perspective they have. Like you were just saying earlier, people didn't want to take you off drugs by giving you medicine. It was a weird thing, and now people are adjusting to that. What do you think was the biggest? When do you think the turnaround happened, though? Like, since you've been involved in all this, when do you think the turnaround happened of the technology being able to catch up, and on top of that, people's perspectives changing on that. This is a very sensitive subject. This is, something people, it's not a headache. It's not, a broken bone where you could just wrap it up and you fix it. This is lifestyle changing. When did you start seeing the changes kind of happen of people adopting and trying to do the research and use the tools that they're giving and that people like yourself are giving people?
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of started to see the shift just in the last handful of years, maybe 2-3 years. We've been doing this for approximately 5 or 6 years here in the States. It's been done worldwide again for almost 20 years. But I'd like to think that we maybe had some things to do with it here in the United States. As a company, we've done a lot of promotion. We had a lot of PR events, been on several national news shows with it, and trying to just put the story out there. But I really think the credit probably belongs to just the unfortunately the current epidemic we're facing right now with heroin. Mm-hmm. It's gotten so out of control that I think everyone is starving for a solution for this problem, and which is an interesting story in itself. Why has the heroin epidemic blown out of proportion so much recently? And there's several other factors that you can look up that contributed to that. But one of the main contributing factors was that just from the government trying to regulate and curtail the abuse of prescription drugs by clamping down on the prescribing of them by doctors, because there was a many, and again, I'm not a doctor, so this is just from my own research.
Yeah.
Everyone should verify themselves. There was a big pain treatment movement years ago where it was all about treating people's pain. Pain is a very subjective thing, mm-hmm. and there became an overprescribing of narcotics for treatment of pain. And then now there was an addiction problem that occurred through that. So that by trying to curtail that, drugs were reclassified, and now it's harder to get your refill and your prescriptions. And so there's more restrictions on doctors prescribing these opioids. And what has happened is that you still have those individuals that may hurt their back or get an injury and need opioids, and they get addicted, but then they can't get their second prescription filled. And street heroin is easier to get, and it's cheaper, and it's stronger. You can get heroin at 25% the cost of street, OxyContin.
That's unreal.
So now you're seeing the face of heroin addiction change. And when you think of a heroin addict, everyone would probably think of that person that's homeless on a sidewalk. Mm-hmm. It's not that. It's soccer moms. It's teens that take it recreationally, get hooked. So you're seeing it all. It doesn't discriminate. It's a vast epidemic. It's getting out of control. So some of that was contributed to the restriction on opioids, and there's also the drug trade itself, and it's being readily available from Mexico. And I've read some stories before about just in the Middle East ever since the toppling of the Taliban and Saddam, there's been increased production in the opium markets there, creating vast quantities. So I think it's just it's a perfect storm of all these different things that have occurred in the last few years that have really spiked this epidemic. And then now you're seeing people, scrambling to figure out how do we stop this. And so that's putting more focus, I believe, on medication-assisted treatment. So I think it's starting to get its due attention that it's always deserved. And so that's part of the reason, in my opinion, why I think you're starting to see this more general acceptance of programs like this that use medication to treat addiction.
Brady Grenier joins us today on Outreach Radio Chicago. You can find more information at beataddiction.com or call 888-993-1099. And I think you brought up such a great point just a few moments ago about the perception of heroin is you're going to see some dirty, grisly person out in the under the overpass, and they're going to be doing it, right? But then you sit around and you're like, no, it's the 16-year-old boy after high school. It's the 34-year-old mom after soccer practice. It's all different types of people, and it makes me, the first thing that comes into my mind is we're doing the medically induced treatment, right? Does the implant could it help? Does it affect age groups, genders, how long the user's been doing it? Is it all a different factor? Is it person by person?
Well, the naltrexone works on most of the population. There's a small segment of the population that it doesn't work in. I think there's some genetic factors with that. For the most part, it helps most individuals. The dosage may need to be different per individual based on body weight, but other than that, the implant itself lasts several months, and that the length of time it lasts will differ based on patient's metabolism. So it could vary in the how long it really works for someone. But the drug itself is relatively safe. Like I said before, it's non-addictive. Relatively mild side effects of the drug itself. So it kind of works the same, but it works a little different with alcoholism versus opioid addiction, heroin addiction. With alcoholism, it's a different. It really, really curtails the cravings that these people receive, but it doesn't stop you from getting drunk. That's the very interesting thing when it comes to treatment of alcoholism. It'll curtail those cravings, and it makes you not want to have that drink. But if you were to drink on it, it's not like you get violently sick, but you actually can get drunk, lose your faculties, get a DUI, but you don't get the buzz. So it takes away the pleasure from consuming alcohol. But you can drink yourself drunk and pass out, but you wake up with a massive hangover and you didn't really enjoy that, so it'll probably it'll be a deterrent for your use next time since you're not getting anything out of it.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Works a little differently. The biggest thing, though, is it's about getting rid of those cravings that intrusive to that addict. They just can't stop thinking about that next drink. So that's where it really helps in alcoholism. And with heroin and prescription pills, it actually blocks the effects of the medication. As long as there's enough in the system to block the receptors in the brain, then typically if someone uses, they won't get high. So they're not getting any effects whatsoever from the drug until, of course, that drug wears off, and then the heroin receptors are able to, the drug is able to engage with those receptors again once the implant wears out, which is a critical time that medical professionals need to be wary of when they're treating people with any form of naltrexone. Is when that naltrexone wears off, you have to be very careful with that patient, make sure they're not using, because their tolerance is going to have gone down since they last used several months ago or weeks ago, and they have to be very careful if they fall off the wagon and use again, that the dose they used to use 3 months ago, 6 months ago, can kill them now because their tolerance is not the same as it was beforehand.
Wow, so it's constantly a fine line for you guys then, huh? Like you're constantly having to, do the research, keep an eye out, and you're constantly developing. So in that aspect then, what do you see personally? What is your goal for, let's say, the next 10 years, so on, however long we're able to do this? What do you believe, what is the ultimate goal for the program? Where do you see yourself, and what is your hope of all this? Like what makes you, is it how proud you are, the success stories that are coming from it? Is it knowing that you're giving somebody the resource for it? What are you most proud of, and what are you looking forward to the most in the next 10 years?
Well, I think it's very rare to come across an opportunity where you can have such a drastic impact on society and a worldwide crisis. And there are other people in this field, which is great because there's competition, and that makes the product get even better. So I think there's a sense of pride. I mean, it doesn't get old every time we talk to someone or hear from someone that they tell you, this was my miracle, this saved my life. It's a pretty good motivator. Unfortunately, that the industry is growing huge, and so that's a bad thing. But it leads to an opportunity to fix a problem, and as a company, or many companies stand to make a living by helping people. But I think that the biggest reward is actually making a social impact. So I see in the next 10 years that, at least with our company, my goal is that the concept behind our program is to bring it to the addict. Typically, addiction treatment is not easy to find or readily available like it is just to go down the street to your doctor's office.
Right.
You have to search out addiction treatment. A lot of people travel for it to go to these 30-day rehabs and those types of programs, which some work for some people, some don't. I mean, there's something for everybody. AA works for a lot of people, and that's great. We encourage all these other programs within our program. We feel like the more hands someone has in their treatment of addiction, the better their chance of success long term. So that said, our goal is to bring this program to not only the big cities, but the rural areas that may even need it more per capita. And the challenge is, people will fly or drive hours to come and get an implant. But what's more important is what happens after that. And if people are just coming in to get an implant, you pat them on the back and say, hey, go find some counseling, well, then that's irresponsible. So what our company is doing is we're building a network of counselors trained in our counseling program around the country so that they're there in the rural areas. If someone gets our program or even a competitive implant or some other naltrexone therapy, there's access to the actual psychosocial program. That's the most important part for the long term. And that typically is better to do face-to-face. There's a big movement with telemedicine where you can do counseling via things such as Skype and everything. But there's no great substitute for face-to-face and actually being in front of someone. So we want to have a network of counselors close by to everyone so that people can get those counseling sessions, because the counseling part of our program may take 4 to 6 months. It's not realistic to expect someone to drive or fly in for their counseling. That's an outpatient program for 50-minute, 1-hour counseling session to drive an hour to get to there and back home. So our goal is to have distribution points throughout the United States to just make it very convenient for someone to get this program. So that's what I see happening. I also see in the next 10 years that the government, FDA, and I think there needs to be more involvement with the implant itself going through the regulatory process, so that insurers will jump on the bandwagon to pay for it, because that's one of the other hurdles in the industry is, these types of programs are so new that insurance companies don't know what to do with that. So when they don't know what to do with something, they typically don't want to pay for it. So that's another hurdle that needs to be overcome, because in the long term, it's going to bring down financial stress on the healthcare system, at least with the addiction industry, if you get more people in these types of medication-assisted treatment programs. But that's a battle that needs to be fought over the next few years to get wide acceptance from the payers, so that now you have more people that can afford the program. So it's not strictly a private pay and hybrid of some insurances paying here and there, because some insurances are good and subsidize it, which is fantastic, but it's not across the board yet. And that's kind of what needs to happen over time, so that everybody has access to this treatment, not just those who can afford it.
Well, at the very least, even if it's brand new and there's hurdles that still need to get jumped over and whatnot, the fact of the matter is you're giving people options to better their lives and to get rid of these demons and these diseases in which they are. And the big seller for me is you're not promising a magic pill. You're not promising a magic, solution, everything. There's work after it. There's work after the procedure. There's things you need to do as a human being to get over this. It's not something some doctor is going to fix for you. It's a disease you could fix on your own with the proper tools and people like yourself and everything you guys do. Brady, thank you so much for joining us today on Outreach Radio Chicago. Is there any last words you want to give to the audience here in Chicago?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you just said. I mean, also I want to say that any program, the patient needs to be motivated. This is not something that you could just force someone here to get a procedure done and go through treatment. They're just like with any program. There has to be a will to stop, and if someone truly has that will, we see this as one of the best programs out there to help. So again, the person needs to want help, regardless of what treatment they're going into.
I couldn't say it any better. You could find more information at beataddiction.com or dial 888-993-1099. And it has been our honor to have the director and CEO of BioCorRX. He is Brady Grenier. Thank you so much, Brady. You have a home here on Outreach Radio Chicago. We hope if you guys ever have any new outbreaks, any new research, anything like that, please, the people of Chicago want to help out. We want to help out here in the show. It's not every day that people who are struggling with such a terrible thing have an opportunity and have people willing to help them out if they're willing just to do a little research and a little work on their own. Thank you so much, Brady.
I want to say one last thing.
Yeah, please.
There is a place in your area in Crystal Lake that offers our program, so that will be the nearest to your listeners.
Awesome. And then, of course, if you go to beataddiction.com, you'll see the Crystal Lake location. And then if anybody else, if you're traveling, if you know somebody in a different state, anything like that, these guys do some great work. You just heard Brady here on the show, and all I could say is it's out there for you guys. There's no need to live with these terrible things anymore, and you can do it if you put the work on there. He is Brady Grenier. Brady, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back on Outreach Radio Chicago. And that'll do it for us here on Outreach Radio Chicago. I hope you enjoyed this show. A very special thank you to our guest, Brady Grenier from BioCorRX Recovery Program. Go to www.beataddiction.com or call 1-888-993-1099. If you know anybody who's battling addiction, you need anybody who needs any type of help, heroin, alcoholism, whatever the case may be, guys, this is a great resource. Please do the research and share the information. That is the number one goal here on Outreach Radio Chicago, is that we can give you the proper resources so you can do the research and help yourselves out. And that'll do it for us, though, today, guys. Follow us on Twitter. We're at mmercado2333. Like the page on Facebook at Outreach Radio Chicago. And subscribe to us on YouTube at Mike Mercado2333 for pre- and post-show content. For everybody here at Outreach Radio Chicago, we'll see you next time. Take us home, Hav. Hey everybody, Mike Mercado here from Outreach Radio Chicago, and I just want to thank you all for all the support you have given us on the brand new show. If someone you know wants to get the word out on a fundraiser, charity, or foundation in your local community, please send us an email at outreachradiochicago@gmail.com or send me one personally at mmercado@newswebradio.net. Or you can tweet me at mmercado2333, and don't forget to like our Facebook page at Outreach Radio Chicago. From right here at the studios, we'll see you next time on Outreach Radio Chicago.